there's nothing.
On my way.
Hello friends, and welcome to Build-a-Barbarian Workshop. Today I'm excited to share the full build guide for my Tavern Brawler Wizard, the character I ran for my most recent solo honor mode run. If you're new to the series, then yes, you heard that right. It's a wizard that uses Tavern Brawler. That might sound like a meme, and although the character certainly gets into some shenanigans, the build itself is very real and not a joke. It's fun, dynamic, powerful, and has a different trick up its sleeve for every fight. It plays unlike anything else I've tried in BG3, and is powerful enough to clear honor mode solo. If you're looking for a different way to play a caster, then this is the build for you. But let's get the obvious question out of the way first. Why would you even want to invest in strength on a wizard? I first had the idea for this build when playing around with the reworked Gloves of Battlemage's power. These gloves got a redesign for patch 8. Now they give you arcane acuity whenever you deal damage with a spell or cantrip that uses a weapon. Or, that's what they say they do anyways. In reality, they also trigger for all sorts of weird things, some of which aren't even spells. They trigger from surface damage like Burning, Caustic Brine, and Electrocuted, from certain spells that deal damage via a status like Evard's Black Tentacles and Phantasmal Killer, and perhaps most interestingly of all, whenever you throw something with a health bar, which is basically anything that isn't a weapon, from potions, to chairs, to enemy characters. I'll be going over these gloves in more detail in the Act 2 portion of the video, but for now, let's focus on that throwing interaction. You may not have noticed this before, but anytime you throw something that has a health bar, you deal 1d4 bludgeoning damage to it. This damage happens automatically. It triggers whether or not you actually hit the target you threw them at, and whether or not the thing you're throwing takes fall damage. It even triggers if you throw them into a chasm. This 1d4 bludgeoning damage triggers the Gloves of Battlemage's power. The reason for this is due to an obscure bug that would take a video of its own to explain, so for now, all that matters is that it does. When I first discovered this, I immediately wanted to build around it. Arcane Acuity is an absolutely busted status in Baldur's Gate 3. Each stack of Acuity gives you +1 to your spell attack rolls and spell save DC, which is equivalent to raising your casting stat by 2. Having the maximum 10 stacks of Arcane Acuity is the same as increasing your casting stat by a whopping 20 points, which is just crazy. What this means is, if we can consistently trigger the gloves, we can afford to neglect our casting stat without hurting the potency of our spells. This lets us invest more in physical stats like strength, which is great because higher strength lets us throw heavier enemies. So that was my idea, a strength-based spellcaster that charges up their spells by literally throwing their enemies. It was a character concept that I knew I just had to build around. And here's what I came up with. I give you Brawn, because anybody who tells you that brains will triumph over brawn is kidding themselves.
I'll perish.
Throwing somebody triggers extra attack in this game, so this character really wants extra attack. I also wanted to play a full spellcaster, so I was really only looking at two subclasses, Valor Bard and Bladesinger Wizard. Both get extra attack at level 6, and both make a great throw caster. I picked Bladesinger for the Wizard spell list because I had some ideas for how to use some Wizard exclusive spells like Arcane Lock and Arcane Gate, which don't have scrolls. Also Evard's Black Tentacles, but Bards can cast that one with a scroll or with a Strange Tendril Amulet. As for race, it's not essential, but I recommend playing Wood Elf or Wood Half Elf for the extra 5 feet of movement with Fleet of Foot. I knew I wanted 11 levels of Bladesinger for access to the Arcane Gate spell, but the final level is a flexible choice. Personally, I actually respect in each act. I went with a Rogue level in Act 1 for expertise in athletics. In Act 2, I took a level in Cleric for armor proficiencies. And in Act 3, I switched that level to a level of Barbarian for the unarmored defense passive. If I were to play this character again, I'd just do the Barbarian level right from the start and go Bladesinger other than that. That's how I'll be talking about it in this guide. At low levels, you're extremely squishy and you can only use Bladesong twice per long rest, so a Barbarian level gives you something to do when you can't Bladesing, and plus, Rage is nice at low levels for the damage resistance, and because it gives you advantage on athletics while you're raging. Barbarian also gives us medium armor proficiency and shields, which are essential for how I use the Boots of Elemental Momentum, an item that we can get right at the start of Act 2. More on those boots when I get to the Act 2 section. For background, I took Soldier for proficiency in athletics. If you take Barbarian at level 1, you can also get proficiency in athletics that way, but athletics proficiency is essential, so make sure you get it one way or another. For stats, we want to have 20 strength at all times if possible. Why is that? Well, because 20 strength is required to throw most medium creatures. The total weight you can throw is given by this formula right here, 0.2 times your strength score squared kilograms. With 20 strength, you can throw characters weighing up to 80 kilograms or 160 pounds. BG3 uses a kilogram-pound conversion of 2 to 1, even though that's not exactly right. Most medium creatures weigh 150 pounds, except for Dragonborn and Half-Orcs, which weigh 200 pounds. Also Karlach for some reason. She really is bigger than other people. Before Act 2, the only way to get 20 strength is with an elixir of Hill Giant strength. So in Act 1, you'll be chugging those elixirs. And if we're chugging elixirs every long rest, then we can use this stat spread right here. We'll dump strength for now since we're getting it from elixirs. We'll take 16 dexterity for initiative and armor class, 17 constitution, which we can bump up to 18 once we get Tavern Brawler. That gives us higher hit points and higher AC with unarmored defense, 14 intelligence, which is mostly just for spell prep since I'm not going to pick any spells for early game that care about DC. And then lastly, you can put the final 2 points in wisdom or charisma, up to you. For Act 1 progression, we're assuming a level 1 barbarian start, so then we'll take wizard at level 2. For cantrips, I took Minor Illusion and Booming Blade. Minor Illusion just because it's good. It's always good to be able to reorder enemies so that they're grouped up for a big spell. Booming Blade is honestly not as good on this character as it is on some others, simply because I mostly want to be taking throw attacks, but, sometimes you don't want to throw, you want to do a melee attack, and Booming Blade is good. The only cantrip that's actually mandatory is Acid Splash, but we don't need it until Act 2 when we get the Boots of Elemental Momentum. I'll talk about that later, but we can take Acid Splash at Wizard level 4, because at that point we'll actually need it. At Wizard level 2, we take Bladesinger as our subclass, and then at Wizard level 4, we'll be taking Tavern Brawler for our first feat, and then we'll put the stat increase in Constitution, which will bump it up to an even 18, but once we respec in Act 2, we'll be moving that over to Strength. For spells, I don't want to go over every possible spell you could pick, but the important thing to remember for Wizard is that you can scribe scrolls, so the highest priority spells to pick are the ones that don't have scrolls. The big ones for Act 1 are Enhanced Leap, Long Strider, Shield, and Arcane Lock. Some other early game spells that do have scrolls that I prioritized are Cloud of Daggers, this one's very important, it was probably my bread and butter in Act 1, Enlarge/Reduce, which I did use throughout the game, Disguise Self, which I mostly use just to activate the Shapeshifter's Boon Ring to get plus 1d4 on all checks, mostly athletics, and Thunderwave, which is just a good spell. It's not as good right now when our spell save DC isn't very high, but we'll be raising our spell save DC a lot later in the game. Before moving on to the Act 1 items, let's talk a little bit about this character's Act 1 strategy. In Act 1, I had basically two main tactics. The first one is forced movement, forcing enemies into bad locations using Shove, Throw, and Thunderwave. We have a pretty good athletics check already, with plus 5 from our strength, plus 2 from proficiency, and then 3 at level 5, then plus 1d4 from the Shapeshifter's Boon Ring, and an additional 1d4 either from the Silver Pendant or from guidance cast by a teammate. Your athletics check is going to be around plus 10, depending on what you roll with the Shapeshifter's Boon Ring and whether or not you have guidance. But that plus advantage is enough to succeed on the vast majority of athletics checks. And we can get advantage either by entering rage or by using the spell Enlarge, because an enlarged character has advantage on all strength checks. Of course, in either case, we can't also concentrate on guidance. Put it all together and you could have an 80, 90, or even sometimes 99% chance to one-shot enemies in some fights. Of course, there isn't always a good cliff that you can throw enemies off of, and that's why we have the spell Cloud of Daggers. Cloud of Daggers is a great Act 1 spell just on its own. It deals damage both when you cast it and on the enemy's turn, so just by casting it, you can deal a total of 8d4 damage on a group, which sometimes can be enough to kill them in Act 1. However, if it's not enough to kill them, then what you're going to do is shove or throw them back into it. If you can find a good choke point to place your Cloud of Daggers, you can easily be hitting the same enemy with it 3, 4, or even 5 times just by shoving them back into it over and over again. Now, as fun as it is to shove an enemy off a cliff or throw them at their friend through a Cloud of Daggers, that's not always an option. Sometimes enemies weigh too much for you to throw them, for example. So the second main strategy of this character is throwing weapons, which in our case are incredibly powerful because Tavern Brawler is really broken. If the idea of using Tavern Brawler with a Bladesinger seems odd to you, consider for a moment that daggers are thrown weapons, and daggers also work with Bladesong. There aren't any returning daggers that you can get until Act 3, but that doesn't matter because you can build a returning dagger of your own using an Eldritch Knight Hireling. The Eldritch Knight's bound weapon property doesn't actually care who did the binding. You can have a hireling bind the weapon, have them hand you the weapon, and then when you throw it, it'll return to you as if it was bound to you. Our Act 1 spell selection and equipment choices are designed to give us the ability to do a hit and run strategy with Tavern Brawler throwing daggers while blade singing. We'll always have Longstrider active, so that gives us plus 10 movement speed, and with Wood Elf we're already at 35, so we have 45 by default. We can also wear Crusher's Ring to give us an additional 10, so that's 55, and then while we're blade singing, that's 10 more, which gives us 65. When you combine that with Enhanced Leap, we have incredible mobility. We can take the high ground, we can run away from attacks, and just generally avoid enemies. For our boot slot, we'll wear the Boots of Speed, which are one of the better pairs of boots in the game, and you can get it right from the beginning of the game. These boots allow us to double our speed for one turn at the cost of a bonus action, which is just crazy the more movement speed you have. We can be doubling that 65 all the way to 130, and we can do that every single turn if we want to. Now what are we going to do with all that movement speed? Well, besides running away from enemies, playing a hit and run game, we're also going to be using the improvised melee weapon action. This is one of my favorite parts of the build, and it works really well with movement speed. Improvised melee weapon lets you pick up an enemy or an item and use them as a weapon for a melee attack. It's very similar to throw. In fact, you can basically think of it as a throw attack, except it makes a melee attack rather than a ranged attack. As with throw, we need a high enough strength score in order to be able to pick up an enemy. But unlike throw, in order to make the attack, we will actually pick up and walk with the enemy all the way to the target destination and then make the attack. That distance that we walk while carrying them does cost movement speed, and then when we make the attack, it costs an attack as normal. However, you can cancel the action by right-clicking, and you will drop the enemy wherever you are at the time you canceled it, which basically means you can use improvised melee weapon to reposition enemies at the low cost of only your movement speed. This ability is really powerful and also really hilarious. There are all sorts of things you can do with this when you start getting creative with it. On a wizard, you can use it to move a bunch of enemies into a close-knit pile so you can hit them all with the same spell. Or you can put an enemy in their own treasure room and then arcane lock them inside so they have to waste a few turns trying to break out. Or more simply, if they're not close enough to a ledge for you to throw them off of it, you can just carry them closer and then throw them off of it. Seriously, this ability is incredibly good, and it's only limited by your imagination. Well, that and your movement speed, but once we get to Act 2, we'll be able to have enough movement speed that even that won't be a limit. Besides movement speed increasing items, we're also going to be using two pieces of equipment that interact with lightning charges. The Sparkle Hands gloves and the Protecty Sparkswall robes. The Sparkle Hands gloves claim that they give you lightning charges whenever you make an unarmed attack, but that's slightly misleading because in this game, a throw attack counts as an unarmed attack, at least for certain abilities, and these gloves are one of them. So anytime you throw a weapon or a creature at another creature, you will get lightning charges. You have to throw them at somebody to get the lightning charges. You can't just throw them at the ground. Lightning charges are great because they increase our accuracy by 1, which is always nice, but they also add 1 lightning damage to all our damage. And when I say all our damage, I mean all our damage. It'll add to fall damage, to the 1d4 bludgeoning damage you do when you throw someone, to throw attacks with a weapon. it'll add to burning damage you deal, and so on and so forth. It's good to just have these because they'll just make everything a little bit better. And then as long as we're wearing these robes, the Protectee Sparks Wall, our lightning charges will also give us +1 AC, which is a nice little bonus as well. And then these robes are compatible with Bladesong. We now have a very respectable AC while we're Bladesinging. We have a base AC of 17, that's 4 from our Constitution modifier and 3 from our Dexterity modifier. We get to add Constitution because of Unarmored Defense from Barbarian. And then our robes give us another +1 from our lightning charges, that's 18. And then we get +2 from Bladesong, which goes up to +3 at Wizard level 5. And then we could even throw on the Ring of Protection for another +1. So our total armor class while Bladesinging is 21 or 22 depending on our level. That's pretty good for the low levels. Combined with a relatively big health pool, because of our high constitution, we actually have a lot of survivability for a wizard. Especially when you consider with how much movement speed we have, we won't be taking that many attacks anyways. And then if you're not Bladesinging, you may as well use a shield, because it also gives you +2 AC, so it breaks even. And you have proficiency in it because of the level in Barbarian. In fact, if I'm being entirely honest, I think Bladesong's pretty overrated, at least at low levels. I mean, think about it. You get +2 AC from a shield, and you get +2 AC from Bladesong. Now, it does give you +10 movement speed, which is nice, but the shield, if you use the Adamantine shield, which is the best shield at low levels, is also going to give you immunity to critical hits. I do think that's better than Bladesinging, and you don't even have to use a charge to use it. So, frankly, I think in most cases, you want to just be wearing this shield anyways. But then as you get more Bladesong charges, as your Bladesong AC bonus goes up from 2 to 3 to 4, that calculus will slowly change, and it'll slowly make more sense to be using Bladesong rather than wielding a shield. I don't have any hard and fast rules for when one is better than the other, but I wasn't using the shield at all in Act 3, and I was mostly using the shield in Act 1 and 2, so it's kind of up to you. I will say that if you're playing solo rather than in a party, crit immunity is basically mandatory, because otherwise you can just get unlucky and get crit down in one round. If you're playing in a party, you have a lot more leeway, and so you have more room to play around with Bladesong. Now, I know it probably seems weird for me to say play a Bladesinger but don't Bladesong very much, and you're right, that is a little odd, but remember, this isn't an ordinary Bladesinger. The main thing we're getting out of it is extra attack. That's the reason I took the subclass. I didn't take it for Bladesong, I took it for extra attack. Bladesong is this other thing I get that I use sometimes, and I think that's the way to think about it. Like many builds, this character has a huge power spike in Act 2. We get access to 2 items that totally change the way we play the game, and we also get access to some of the most iconic and powerful spells that this character uses throughout the rest of the run. The first key item that you get in Act 2 are the Boots of Elemental Momentum. You can buy these boots from Lady Esther in the Mountain Pass, which means that you can get them literally right at the start of Act 2, as soon as you finish Act 1. These boots are deceptively powerful. The boots give you 2 stacks of the Momentum condition whenever you deal elemental damage with a spell. And the Momentum condition gives you +5 feet of movement speed for each stack to a maximum of 5 stacks, or 25 feet of movement speed. But what makes these boots so good is that you can actually break them and overflow the 5 stack maximum of momentum. How that works is you need to get all your momentum from a single cast of a spell. If you do that, you'll overflow the maximum and there will be no maximum to how many stacks you can get. However, it will stop giving you extra movement speed after 20 stacks, or 100 feet. But 100 feet of movement speed is so much, and additional stacks will still make it last longer. So the easiest way to do this is to literally just pile up a bunch of random items on the ground and then cast some area of effect spell on top of them to get all your stacks of momentum at once. I like using Acid Splash because it's a cantrip, so you don't have to spend any resource to use it. One thing to note, if you get any more momentum after you do this, then the game will notice that you're over the cap and it'll reset you to 5. So what I usually do is I pre-buff myself with the boots, giving myself 20, 30, as high as 60 momentum, and then I take them off for another pair of boots, usually the boots of speed, and then I will have that momentum throughout the whole fight. This little tech is seriously broken. It is so powerful. When you have this much movement speed, there is so much you can do with it. You can carry enemies all the way across the battlefield and deposit them somewhere so far away that they can't interact with the battle at all, and then just run away and go kill their friends. You can carry enemies all the way across the battlefield to a ledge that's not even part of the fight, and then throw them off. And most importantly, you have enough movement speed that you can ferry multiple enemies back and forth, so you can basically just rearrange the battle as you see fit. Everyone is going to be standing exactly where you want them to be, as long as they're light enough for you to pick them up. Now, I'm going to show you some things that you can do with that movement speed, but first I need to introduce you to the other item that this character uses, the Gloves of Battlemage's Power. I love these gloves. They are so weird and so good. Someday I'll probably make a video that explains how they work in detail, but the main thing to know about them is that they trigger from all sorts of stuff that is not described by this tooltip at all. I actually wrote a long Reddit post with Reddit user Jay Randall that explains how they work in detail. I'll put a link in the description if you're curious. The short explanation is that these gloves will trigger from any status that deals damage. There's a ton of statuses that trigger them. If you're curious, see my Reddit post where we list all of them in the appendix. But the big one is just the burning condition from an ordinary alchemist's fire. And since, as I mentioned earlier in the video, you also get acuity when you throw a destructible item like a grenade, an Alchemist Fire makes a great combo because it gives you +2 acuity from the throw and +2 from the burning damage for a total of +4 just from throwing a very accessible consumable. Now that we have the gloves, we can stack our arcane acuity very easily, which gives us a very high spell save DC without even needing to find a way to increase our intelligence very high. So now it's time to change our stats again. This time we're going to raise our strength all the way to 17. We're going to respec, so we put that 1 point from Tavern Brawler into Strength, putting it at 18, and then we'll get the Potion of Everlasting Strength from Araj Obladra in Moonrise Towers, which will put our Strength to 20. This allows us to pick up medium creatures again, as before, but now we don't need an elixir to do it, so we can use something else for that elixir slot. The Bloodlust elixir is the most powerful elixir because it gives you an additional action, but another good one for this character is a Colossus elixir because it gives you advantage on all of your athletics checks without using your concentration on something like the Enlarge spell. Vigilance Elixir is another good one for +5 initiative. Anyways, back to stats. We'll put our Dexterity at 16. We'll put our Constitution at 14, because that's as high as we can get it at this point. And now we can dump our Intelligence all the way down to 8. Don't worry, we're going to be wearing the headband of Intellect. That's how we'll keep our Intelligence up for now. And then any remaining points you can put in Wisdom or Charisma at your discretion. I usually prefer Charisma for stuff like Persuasion checks. Even though Intelligence isn't our highest stat, we still have a very high spell save DC because Gloves of Battlemage's power are just so good and so easy to trigger. Here are a few of my favorite spells that interact really well with the gloves and all of the arcane acuity that they give you. My favorite is without a doubt Evard's Black Tentacles. This spell is so good and it's even better when you're wearing the gloves. It may not be the flashiest effect, but it can shut down entire fights by itself. The really interesting interaction is the bludgeoning damage that it deals to enemies that are caught in the tentacles actually triggers the Gloves of Battlemage's power. So it creates this self-sustaining combo where your high spell save DC gets enemies caught in it, and then the damage they take from being caught in it keeps your spell save DC high. So then you can just basically sit back, relax, and do nothing while they're slowly crushed to death by a spell that it's impossible for them to escape from. The spell has a pretty big area of effect just on its own, so you can catch a lot of enemies in it just by placing it intelligently, but it becomes really broken when you combine it with our movement speed and improvised melee weapon. You can make yourself immune to the effects of Black Tentacles by wearing the Ring of Free Action. While you're immune to the restrained condition, you can walk in and out of the tentacles without penalty. So you can carry enemies into it, cancel improvised melee weapon to drop them in it, and then walk away, and then just repeat that till every single enemy in the fight is in the tentacles, and then you've effectively won. You can just go hide somewhere and wait for them all to die. Another spell that works very well with the Gloves of Battlemage's power is Phantasmal Killer. This is a 4th level spell that's really easy to overlook. I know I overlooked it myself. Basically what it does is it gives the target a version of the Frightened condition. So they can't move, they have disadvantage on their attacks, but then they also take 4d10 psychic damage every turn. This is good for 2 reasons. First of all, that psychic damage triggers the Gloves of Battlemage's power. So it'll do something similar to what Black Tentacles does, where it has this self-sustaining combo that just takes one enemy out of the fight. But the other thing that's good about it is that it gets around certain kinds of legendary resistance. A lot of late game bosses have a version of legendary resistance that only triggers on effects that are in the incapacitating status group. So something like Hold Monster, for example, they'll get their legendary resistance, but Phantasmal Killer is not in that category. And so you can use it to get around the legendary resistance for certain bosses. And if that boss doesn't have a ranged attack or a way of breaking out of Frightened, then it's just as good as paralyzing it. You can just walk away and they'll slowly die to it. I used this to beat both Sarevok and Orin, and it just made a total joke out of them. They just weren't able to do anything, and I just had them sit there while they slowly died. Any spell with a saving throw is improved by Arcane Acuity, so I won't go through every saving throw spell, but just know that the ones that are good normally are also good with the gloves. Hold Person, Hold Monster, that sort of thing. But I do want to go over a couple other spells I used on this run that I don't usually use, that I was pleasantly surprised by with this character. The first one is the Enlarge/Reduce spell, specifically the Reduce variant. When cast on an enemy or neutral character, the target of the spell gets a Constitution saving throw to resist the effect. Constitution saves are often pretty high for enemies, but with Arcane Acuity, we can get a very reliable chance to hit it anyways. The reduced condition is an interesting debuff for a throw character because it gives the target disadvantage on all strength checks, so it makes it easier for us to hit an athletics check against them. But the real thing that makes this good is the fact that it reduces their size, which means that it also reduces their weight. It divides their weight by 2.35, which is often enough to put them within range for you to be able to throw them. Furthermore, if you shrink a medium creature, it becomes small, and small creatures have a maximum weight of 80 pounds. So shrinking a medium creature will always put it within range for you to be able to throw them, no matter what its initial weight was. I used this spell to get a one-shot kill on Garangoth Thorm, and I also used it to shrink Malice Thorm so I could carry him all the way to a cliff and throw him off. Although that strategy did, backfire. Another spell I was really impressed by in the mid-game was Crown of Madness. What may not be obvious about this spell at first glance is that it makes the target hostile to everybody. So not only will they attack their allies will attack them. I'm not entirely sure how the AI decides who to target, but if you run far away, which is very easy to do when you have practically infinity movement speed, the AI will almost always prefer to attack its own now hostile teammate to doing nothing. So you can make one enemy hostile to all their allies, and then just let all the rest of the allies beat them up while you wait comfortably safe behind closed doors. When I did this to Captain Therazin in the Githyanki Kresh, I even arcane locked the door to make it really hard for them to do anything else. I was shocked at how willing all of her subordinates were to just murder her on the spot. As for Act 2 weapons and armor, personally, I just didn't use Bladesong hardly at all, and so I just wore armor, a shield, and used a non-Bladesong weapon. With our new respec stats, we only have 14 constitution, which means that we're no longer getting that much AC from unarmored defense, although that will change in Act 3. And with the Boots of Elemental momentum trick, not even the movement speed of Bladesong is that impressive. So, what I would recommend is to just use whatever combination of medium armor and shield gives you the highest possible AC and crit immunity. The Adamantine Scale Mail is always good, and if you do that, you can use either the Iron Bandage Shield for high AC, or the Sentinel Shield for initiative, or you can just wear the highest AC medium armor you can get your hands on, and then use the Adamantine Shield. And then just use the Lightning Jabber for your thrown weapon, again using the Eldritch Knight Hireling trick to bind it so it becomes returning. One final piece of Act 2 equipment that I want to shout out is the Amulet of Branding, which you can get from the Kresh merchant whose name I will not attempt to pronounce. This amulet gives you Brand the Weak, an ability that lets you apply vulnerability to bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage once per long rest. The vulnerability only lasts for one hit, but fall damage is bludgeoning damage, so you can use it on an enemy right before you knock them off a ledge to deal twice as much fall damage to them. With Brand the Weak active, you don't even need a very high ledge at all in order to kill many enemies in one shot. Bye bye, Marcus. I guess those wings that you got from the Absolute aren't all that after all. That's it for the Act 2 build choices, but I do want to offer one more piece of advice. The Apostle of Myrkul is surprisingly difficult to beat with this character. The giant skeleton lord himself was almost designed in a lab to counter this character. You can't throw him, you can't shove him, he's totally rooted in place and immune to all force movement. He has resistance to piercing damage, so throwing the lightning jabber or a dagger is not going to do very much damage to him. I didn't realize this until halfway through the fight, but one good strategy is to position Black Tentacles so it covers the ladders up to the ledge so that his Necromites will get caught in it when they try to go heal him. You can position the Black Tentacles so it covers 2 of the 3 ladders, and then you just kind of need to cover the 3rd one to make sure they don't sneak past it. Before the fight, make sure to bind a light hammer, which is the only thrown weapon that deals bludgeoning damage at this stage in the game, so that you can get around his resistance. Then it's just a matter of whittling him down over time. It's not the most interesting fight, but it'll get the job done. Then, at long last, we come to Act 3. I often find that I'm sometimes getting tired of a build by Act 3 because I've already tried all the core mechanics by that point of the game, but that was not the case with this character. This might be the most fun I've ever had in Act 3 on a solo run. The first thing you want to do in Act 3 is go on a shopping spree. A few of the key items for our Act 3 build don't require combat to acquire, so we're going to go get those first. Right out of the gates in Rivington, we can buy the Cold Snap Dagger from Ferg Drorer. As long as we hold it in our offhand, then any enemy that misses us with an attack roll will receive the chilled condition. The tooltip says that there's a saving throw to resist this, but there is not. If they attack us and miss, they will receive 2 turns of chilled. I'll talk more about chilled in a moment. Next, we want to go to Razamith's Tower and steal the Robe of the Weave. This will give us a +1 to our spell save DC, and also will give us +2 AC while being compatible with Bladesong and Unarmored Defense. Next, we're going to go to Hell. If you go to the House of Hope, you don't actually have to fight Raphael, provided that you don't trigger the alarm. So, don't attack anybody, don't get caught stealing, and if you do steal things, don't steal the Orphic Hammer or your contract if you made a deal with him. Provided you follow those rules and you keep your disguise on while you're there, you can enter the House of Hope, steal a few items that you need for this build, and then leave and continue with your adventure and come back later. The two items are the Helldusk Helmet and the Amulet of Greater Health. The Helldusk Helmet is the only item in the game that gives critical hit immunity and is compatible with Bladesong. A big strategy of ours in Act 3 is intentionally triggering opportunity attacks to proc Chilled with the Cold Snap Dagger, so we really want critical hit immunity. The Amulet of Greater Health sets our Constitution score to 23, which is really good on its own for the extra health, but also it's incredible with Unarmored Defense from Barbarian because it makes our AC really high while unarmored. With these new items in hand, it's time to respec our stats once again. We'll put our Strength at 17, which when combined with Tavern Brawler and the Potion of Everlasting Vigor from Mirage Obladra puts us up to 20. Dexterity to 15, which we can bump up to 16 with the Hag Hair. And then Intelligence goes to 16, which frees up our helmet slot to not need to wear the headband anymore. Wisdom and Charisma I left at 8, and then I left Constitution at 8 as well, but remember that's going up to 23 with the Amulet of Greater Health. This new stat spread gives us a very high AC by default. If we have Haste or a Potion of Speed, we get an additional +2. Situationally, we can add 5 with the Shield spell, and then we get +4 from our Bladesong. Putting it all together, that puts our AC all the way up to 34, which is incredibly high. An enemy would need a +14 attack bonus to even have a chance to hit us. And remember, since we have critical hit immunity with the Helldusk Helmet, a 20 is not an automatic hit. Immunity to critical hits also makes you immune to the automatic hit property of a 20, so enemies have to actually be able to hit our AC, and most enemies won't even be able to, which makes us effectively immune to their attack rolls. Once we have our AC extremely high, one of our main tactics is going to be running around the battlefield and intentionally triggering opportunity attacks in order to apply the Chilled condition to enemies. Chilled gives us a couple of things. First of all, it makes them vulnerable to cold damage. This improves the power of two good late-game wizard spells, Cone of Cold and Wall of Ice. Cone of Cold is a solid damaging spell that doesn't require our concentration and can deal good damage if you can make enemies vulnerable to it. This is really easy for us to do because we can apply Chilled without spending any action economy by triggering opportunity attacks. So we can run around the battlefield, cluster enemies up with improvised melee weapon, trigger opportunity attacks to get them vulnerable, and then hit them with a huge Cone of Cold that damages every enemy for double damage. Wall of Ice is another interesting spell that sort of works like a blast spell and an area control spell. The initial burst of ice will deal 10d6 cold damage, which is very solid, especially if you add in the vulnerability from Chilled, but then once the wall breaks or you drop your concentration on it, it'll leave behind a cloud of frigid air that also does 10d6 cold damage, and unlike the wall itself, this cloud does not require your concentration. So you can sort of leave it in place and then throw enemies into it over and over again to deal a lot of cold damage over an entire fight. The other thing that Chilled lets us do is freeze enemies. If you get an enemy wet after you get them chilled, you will automatically apply the frozen condition to them for one turn with no saving throw. The frozen condition ticks down at the start of turn, so they will unfreeze at the start of their turn, but frozen is still useful to apply on your own turn. For one thing, they will be incapacitated on your turn, so they won't be able to use reactions. And second of all, the frozen condition applies vulnerability to bludgeoning, thunder, and force damage. This gives us another way to do what we were doing with the Amulet of Branding in Act 2, of giving an enemy vulnerability to bludgeoning damage for one hit, which can be used to double fall damage. The easiest way to apply wet is to just drop a water bottle next to the chilled enemy, and then break it with an offhand attack. This allows you to apply the frozen condition with your bonus action, saving your action for a big throw. The next item that you'll want to acquire is the Rhapsody dagger carried by Cazador. This dagger allows us to build up the Scarlet Remittance condition whenever we slay an enemy, which gives us a flat bonus to damage, attack rolls, and spell save DC up to a maximum of +3 that lasts until our next long rest. This is probably one of the best items in the game, certainly the most versatile, because it just makes everything you do better. Getting a +3 to attack and damage rolls is kind of like getting a +6 to your core stat, which is just crazy. But perhaps the best part about Rhapsody is that +3 damage adds to all your damage in the same way that lightning charges do. So if you throw an enemy at another enemy, you'll get that +3 damage on the enemy you throw, you'll get that +3 damage on the enemy you throw them at, and if you throw the enemy far enough that they also take fall damage, you'll get that +3 on the fall damage too. You'll also get that +3 on all sorts of things that trigger the Gloves of Battlemage's power, the burn damage from an Alchemist's Fire, the bludgeoning damage from Black Tentacles, the psychic damage from Phantasmal Killer, the list goes on. And since Rhapsody is a dagger, it's compatible with Bladesong, which makes it the best weapon for this build, bar none. As for throwing weapon, we'll use the Eldritch Knight Hireling trick to bind the Cold Snap dagger, so that when we throw it from our offhand, it returns to our offhand, which is good because we need it to be on our offhand for its special abilities. I already mentioned the spells Cone of Cold and Wall of Ice, but there are a couple other endgame spells that are really fun and powerful with this character. One very flavorful spell is Telekinesis. I never use Telekinesis that often on a solo character because it eats up your whole action just to affect one character, but I really liked it with this character. You can use it to set up gravity kills by pulling an enemy up onto the high ground with you and then throwing them down. It has crazy range, so this is very useful. You can also just use it for gravity kills directly if the positioning is right. Something funny about Telekinesis is under the hood, it's technically just a version of the throw action that's a spell rather than an attack roll. So it deals a base 1d4 bludgeoning damage to the thing that you throw, which triggers the gloves in the same way that throw does. Not hugely relevant because it's only +2 acuity, but worth taking note of. Another spell that I found myself using a lot was Haste. I don't normally like concentrating on Haste on a solo run, because if you lose concentration, getting lethargic is really bad, but this character has incredible concentration saves in the late game. We've got proficiency from Barbarian, a bonus to concentration from Bladesong, and advantage on all constitution saving throws from the Amulet of Greater Health. So you can safely concentrate on Haste, and not have to worry about failing your concentration saves, and you just need to make sure that you don't get stunned, paralyzed, or knocked prone. Something like that. Oh, and remember not to cast another concentration spell while you're concentrating on Haste. I did make that mistake. Whoops. Another great late game spell with this character is Cloud Kill. Similar to Phantasmal Killer and Black Tentacles, Cloud Kill will trigger the gloves because it deals damage via a status. Additionally, the status that it deals damage with is part of the poisoned status group, which means that you'll be immune to it if you drink an elixir of poison resistance. If you're immune to Cloud Kill, then you can just walk right into it without taking any damage. What this means is that you can pick up enemies with improvised melee weapon and then just carry them straight into the cloud, drop them off, and then go repeat with all of their friends. You can do this until every enemy in the fight is in the cloud, and then if any of them are still alive, you can use the repeat cast of Cloud Kill to do damage to them all again. This is how I beat the Sharans, and it made a total joke of them. It was so satisfying to just drop them in the cloud and watch them explode from cold a week. Another spell that I absolutely love with this character is one that I had never cast before this run. Arcane Gate. Arcane Gate creates a linked teleportation portal between 2 points selected by you. It uses your concentration, which is a bit unfortunate, but it can be very effective when used creatively. Any character, even an enemy, can use the portal, and I have found that enemies are very willing to do so. So you can place the gate in such a way that when enemies pop out on the other side, they'll be near a ledge, and basically use it to set up gravity kill traps. This is how I beat Gortash, and honestly, I was surprised at how effective it was. He just waltzed straight through the portal, setting himself up for his untimely demise, despite the obvious trap that I had left for him. The last spell that I want to shout out is Curriculum of Strategy, Artistry of War. This spell is a 5th level spell that's basically an upgraded version of Magic Missile that does more damage, can only be used once per short rest regardless of how many spell slots you have, and can only be learned by scribing a scroll. The scroll is found in Razumith's Tower. I used this spell to beat the Elderbrain. Similar to the Apostle of Myrkul, the Elderbrain would be pretty annoying to fight if we used our typical strategies of forced movement and throw attacks. But Artistry of War gives us an easy out that can actually kill the brain in one hit. In order to do this, we'll need a full Illithid in our party, either by getting a full Illithid companion, or by siding with Orpheus over the Emperor. You can also do it yourself, but it's a little bit easier if someone else is doing it rather than you. Full Illithids get the most powerful ability in the game. You heard that right. I genuinely think it's the most powerful ability in the game, and it's probably not even close. That ability is called Fierce Perilous Stakes. It's a good thing that you only get access to this for the last 20 minutes of the game, because it can trivialize any encounter. It lasts for 3 turns, and it gives you vulnerability to all damage, and makes it so you heal yourself on an attack. But honestly, none of that stuff matters at all. The only part of it that matters is that it gives you plus 15 psychic damage on all your damage. Similar to lightning charges, this bonus damage applies to literally everything you do. If it's your damage, it gets it. But unlike lightning charges, it's 15. Imagine having lightning charges that deal plus 15 damage to everything. Oh, but it gets crazier than that, because Fierce Perilous Stakes has no cooldown and stacks. So if you give the full Illithid extra actions, they can apply it to you 2, 3, or even more times than that. Plus, since it's psychic damage, you can easily apply vulnerability by just carrying around the Resonance Stone. So this was my strategy for the final battle. In the fight atop the brain, I wanted to do something clever and use telekinesis. I picked up all the enemies and put them in a big group right around the Emperor. Then I stunned everybody because a stunned character automatically fails on all strength and dexterity saving throws. You know what's a strength saving throw? Telekinesis. My hope was that I could use telekinesis to pick up the dominated red dragon and smash the Emperor with it, killing him in one hit. Sadly, it turns out that the dominated red dragon is immune to all force movement. Boo! So I had to resort to Fierce Perilous Stakes. Instead, I had Orpheus stack a bunch of stacks of it on me, and then I just murdered everybody with magic missiles. Look at that, 60 damage per missile. After that, it was just a simple matter of having Orpheus concentrate on Karsus's compulsion. Then I had him go through the portal first, so he could attack the brain and waste its reaction so I didn't get hit with the brain quake. Then I followed through myself, got close enough to apply the vulnerability from the Resonance Stone, and then I just cast my Fierce Perilous Stakes boosted Artistry of War. The brain was deleted. 1 shot, 1 kill. If you didn't believe what I said at the start of this video, this should be all the proof that you need. Brains will not triumph over brawn. And that's it for my Tavern Brawler Wizard guide. I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed playing the character and thinking about all these mechanics. If you have any questions about the build, I'd be happy to talk about it in the comments, or if you have other thoughts on how you can use some of these mechanics that I was working with in a different way, I'm always curious to hear thoughts from viewers. Also, if you liked the video, I always appreciate if you'd like, comment, and subscribe. This has been Build-a-Barbarian Workshop, and I will talk to you next time.